Hey there! Thank you for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris and welcome to another episode of Bionicle Fanon Reviews, the show where I review all the fan-created, canonized Bionicle models. These are either canonized via the 2005 Dark Hunter or Rahi contest, or even stuff as modern as the TTV canonization contest, which are actually still ongoing. The model here in question is a member of the Dark Hunters. This is Shadow Stealer. So his backstory is that Shadow Stealer has the unique ability to absorb shadows and convert them into energy, making him a very efficient warrior. He was once a member of the Hand of Artakha far before any Toa were created, and was considered a hero amongst the Matoran because he defended them from various threats. After the Hand of Artakha was dissolved and the Toa came into being, Shadow Stealer was left without a sense of purpose, and decided to join the Dark Hunters instead. Since then, he's been a member of the Dark Hunters, and has been slowly making his way back to Odina, where he's been killing some other combatants and even some other weaker Dark Hunters along the way. So backstory aside, let's dive into the main points by which I review all canon Bionicle models. Number 1 is posability, so can I get this into good poses? Number 2 is general building techniques, so is this just reusing stuff from sets, or is it actually trying out something new, and are there any good parts usages? Number 3 is overall aesthetics, so regardless of its role in the story, does this look menacing, does it look cool as a warrior? And finally, number 4 is believability in universe. So does this make sense alongside other denizens of the Matoran universe, and does it make sense as a Dark Hunter with his given backstory? Without further ado though, let's dive right into the review studio and take a look at Shadow Stealer, the Dark Hunter.
Alright, so here is the Dark Hunter Shadow Stealer. He certainly is an interesting looking character, featuring some arguably unorthodox building techniques and having a very unique personality of his own. So a lot of people usually dismiss this model as just being kind of silly and goofy and honestly just not being a good model in general. But I wanted to take a bit of a closer look here to see if there's anything of value to be found throughout this. So the first thing I can immediately say is that at least he's very unique. There's nothing here that's just copied or ripped directly from the LEGO sets, and even includes some interestingly shaped building connections for the knees here to give him some added articulation. So let's start things off with just that, posability. So Shadow Stealer has both a wide range and a very limited range of posability, and here's what I mean by that. So first of all, his upper arms just do not move. They are literally just fixed on Technic axles, so these whole segments just cannot move on Shadow Stealer's body. He's basically just a solid structure where that's concerned. And then he makes up for it, kind of, with these extra long arms out this way, where he has multiple joints on these arms, very strangely placed joints, but at least he can kind of move them around, and the same kind of philosophy continues throughout the rest of this model. Thankfully, the legs are actually surprisingly pretty well done, and I honestly may reuse these for some other mock or some larger aspect of a build, because if you look at how the legs work, you've got the Rakshi spines mounted on the ball joints, so again, you can use them as actual legs, but the way that the knees are built are using what's now an illegal connection, but was a legal connection at least for combiner models back in 2001, arcing the ball joint socket here around a Technic pinhole, so you've got this movement where it's a little bit tight because you are permanently stressing or damaging the pieces here. Not necessarily a technique I'd recommend to use today, but you can actually fully bend his knee like this, and if you wanted to, you could get him into arguably at least semi-interesting poses because he actually does have this knee joint being able to be bent. For instance, you can look like he's really hunched over here, preparing for attack or whatnot. All sorts of very interesting positions that you can get him into that typically would not have been able to be achieved on something this small. So there is that where articulation is concerned. His head is basically just as expected. It's a standard head, and if you think this head looks familiar, well, it's because it does. It's literally just the Kraka head from the 2004 combiner model for the Toa Metru, exactly with the right eye color, even the same kind of shaping of the arrow slicers on his brain here. It just lines up with something we've seen before. So there is that. And finally you have this tail. So the tail is built very similarly to the arms. You've got this long section, very simple, connected by Rakshi limbs, and then some sort of a bladed tail on the back here, in this case using Tahu Nuva's fire swords, which, in my opinion, feel a little bit large for the size of this model. So moving on to the building techniques themselves. Now, there are actually some somewhat creative building techniques here, specifically for the legs and knees. It's a simple connection, but it works, and as long as it doesn't pop off too much, you can actually use it to bend the knees and get him into different poses. Now, the one big con here is that, of course, the arms are just fully fixed, at least the upper arms, which really limits the amount of poses you can do. You really can only have him with his arms facing downwards and then arcing upwards because you cannot move these whatsoever. If you want to rotate these, his entire torso rotates with it, so that is a major con to me. This almost feels more like a caricature than anything, because if you look at just the silhouette of this character, it's a very stylized one with these curved arms, curved upper legs, very long limbs, almost feels like something out of a cartoon, so not necessarily something that really fits well in the Bionicle universe, but that's kind of how it is, and building techniques in general, other than that, are just incredibly simple. The torso, if you can even call it that, is just a series of standard Bionicle handpieces stacked together. The tail is unbelievably simple, with just simple Roxy elements slapped on. And really the only innovative thing, again as I mentioned, are the building techniques used for the knees. So that's kind of where it is at right now. And then we can probably just finalize this quick review up with aesthetics. So overall, aesthetically, as I mentioned before, he might work fine as a cartoon caricature of a person, but if you place him alongside other characters in the Bionicle universe, this may just be me, but he just looks really goofy, and it's kind of difficult to get him into any semblance of a cool looking pose, especially because he cannot move his upper arms. And even if he could, his arms are just so long in comparison to his very short and stunted body that I think it would still look really funny no matter how you try to pose him. So there is that as a major con to me. He just is in general pretty goofy looking. I don't really feel that threatened by him as a warrior, and I don't know, I feel like there are much more threatening Dark Hunters in the entire universe, especially if you consider this guy's backstory. But we'll get to that as we sum up point 4, believability in universe, so let's zoom out right now and take a look at how he compares against some representative samples.
Alright, so here we have Shadow Stealer alongside some representative samples from the Bionicle universe. I have brought alongside all known members and servants of the Hand of Artakha, which was the organization Shadow Stealer was originally a part of. We have Axon over here, the first Toa Helrix, the Spinax Energy Hound, Hydraxon, one of its servants, Umbra, as well as Artakha himself, who is really just an ally to the organization despite it being named after him. So Shadow Stealer, as you can see, scales approximately well next to Toa Helrix in particular, and honestly is scaled relatively well to Axon as well, which honestly surprised me because Shadow Stealer is such a small character that at first I was worried that he would appear too small compared to titans like Axon. But I think because he has a combination of a very large head and these spikes on the back here, it actually does make his profile seem a lot larger than he actually is, which makes him blend in a little bit better. But of course this isn't without its cons, because obviously if you look at just his head, it looks like it's just an exposed Metru head. It's very obviously just a standard Metru head without a mask, and also it just very much looks like the form Krakua took, which was when she shapeshifted into the Toa Metru. So kind of a weird con there. Another thing that makes it feel a little bit strange and out of place in the universe is just the overall proportions of Shadow Stealer feel, again as I mentioned, super cartoonish. If you look at all the other members of the Hand of Artakha, who are generally well proportioned, you can see that Shadow Stealer immediately sticks out as having these really long arms, kind of strangely shaped legs, and a super compact and squished body. So he really does feel like it's kind of a strange choice to have him be included in the Matoran universe and even in the Hand of Artakha, which is why I'm going to give believability in universe just a 5 out of 10. He's not really bad, but he's also not that good, and I kind of have to suspend my disbelief here to make him actually be a part of this entire organization. But setting aside these representative samples, let's just take a look at Shadow Stealer on his own. So Shadow Stealer right here, we're going to start off with the posability, and as I mentioned in the review, it's a bit of a mixed bag, because of course I did like the technique used to move around his legs a little bit. I like the connection there, despite it being an illegal connection. I do like that you can move his knees around, and in terms of that, I think the legs are actually fairly decent for this model. But of course, he really gets hurt on the arms here, which again, as you can see, cannot be moved forwards or back or up and down whatsoever on his body, which is a major con to me. And I can think of quite a few ways to mod this model to actually allow him to do so. So it's a big shame how he just simply cannot do that for the official canon model. But of course, he does have the tail, which adds some extra height, even though the back of the tail is a little bit large, and the head also can be moved around. So posability-wise, I'm going to give him also a 5 out of 10. Perfectly average score. He cannot move his upper arms, which is definitely a con, but his legs are pretty much fine, and the articulation is kind of made up for with the tail as well as the head, so he's fairly well balanced throughout. I only wish that he could just move those upper arms. But then we can probably move on to the next point, which is building techniques. So I certainly cannot say that the creator was not creative when building this model. Again, he does not recycle anything from existing Bionicle models, and it's really just all sort of new stuff. But is the new stuff good? Well, it's kind of debatable, because again, not a big fan of the way the torso was made. If you look closely, the torso is very much just a little blob of Technic pieces, and the real bulk of him comes from his arms, which cannot even be moved. So that's kind of a big con to me. Actually, I'm going to demonstrate this by removing his arms here, just so you can see how tiny his torso is and how close his head is to his legs. Just very strange decisions made here with the proportions of this model. So definitely a con there, but then again, I do like the way that you actually repurpose the Rakshi spines as leg elements. Using the knee joint here was a pretty smart technique, which works out fairly well. But all in all, there's a lot of stuff here that feels either very simple or very awkward. From the head build construction, to the tail, to even the arms, I think this one definitely is a little below average here. So I'm going to give building techniques a 4 out of 10. And finally, for overall aesthetics. Now, can I imagine this guy fighting alongside the Hand of Artakha being a formidable warrior? I don't know. It's a little bit of a stretch, and the cartoonish proportions definitely do not help. I think in terms of overall aesthetics, he's hurt the most by the fact that he simply cannot move his arms. So you're basically stuck in this position, and despite having very long and lanky arms, it only just adds to the awkwardness of the entire model. And so I'm probably going to have to give overall aesthetics a 4 out of 10. Certainly below average in my book, and honestly, this is not one of my favorite builds. But with that, we have wrapped up this review of Shadow Stealer, one of the original members of the Hand of Artakha. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of this model, and if you've built him yourself, how has your experience been with Shadow Stealer? But thank you all for tuning into Duck Bricks. That sums up our review, and again, as usual, be sure to stay tuned for every Monday, where we'll go over a new Bionicle Fanon review unless otherwise stated. Thanks all for tuning in, and bye-bye for now.